Hello, and welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, our journey takes us not to a battlefield, nor to the gilded halls of a summer palace, but to a place of stark, imposing power, bracing itself against the longest and coldest of nights. Our destination is a medieval castle, but we are not visiting as tourists in the daylight. We are slipping quietly through time, arriving in the dead of winter, long after the sun has surrendered the sky. Dim the lights. Settle into your dead and feel the comfort of your own modern warmth. Let the noise of your world fade and allow your mind to drift backward, until you stand before it. A fortress of stone, its towers frosted white by winter's breath. Snowdrifts pile along the battlements like stiff, frozen waves. The wind moans, a low, mournful sound, as if the stones themselves are shivering. You are not merely visiting. You are stepping into the private world of kings and queens at a time when the simple act of sleeping was a nightly battle for survival. Imagine this vast hall of stone, the same one that looks so majestic in daylight, but as night falls, it becomes an echoing cave of icy drafts. The torches sputter on the walls, their golden light casting long, dancing shadows. But the heat they produce rises no higher than your knees. Above you, the vaulted ceilings soar, designed more for grandeur than for comfort. Their beauty seems to mock you in winter. The chill hits you like a slap of water. The walls are thick, yes, but stone does not keep the cold out. Stone stores cold, like a miser hoards coins. You run your hand along the wall, and it is so chilled you half expect your skin to stick. You smell damp stone, wool, and the faint, clinging trace of smoke. This is the contradiction of the medieval fortress. It is a symbol of absolute power, a structure that can withstand a siege, yet it is utterly defenseless against the cold. The king's wealth could build these walls, but it could not purchase an escape from frost. You wonder how anyone could sleep here at all, but sleep they did. Kings and queens were as human as you, needing rest to plot wars, sign decrees, or simply endure the monotony of endless ceremony. And so they began their nightly preparations, not just for sleep, but for a long, cold, and vigilant endurance. This castle, you realize, is not a home. It is a military machine. And in the deep of winter, its inhabitants are under siege from nature itself. The great stone blocks rise around you like frozen sentinels, and you feel the first insistent whisper of the enemy, the draft. It finds sly ways inside. It doesn't just seep through the walls. It whistles through cracks and arrow slits, through gaps in wooden shutters, and through the very mortar that binds the blocks. It is as if the castle itself has lungs, exhaling icy breaths upon its rulers. Historians still argue whether the architects deliberately sacrificed warmth for strength, or whether insulation simply never mattered to people so used to the cold. But as you pull your cloak tighter, you know that for the king or queen preparing for bed, that academic debate means very little. The night is here, and it is cold. Your gaze is drawn to the windows. They are not vast panes of glass, but narrow slits carved for arches. During the day, they are a clever defense, allowing archers to shoot while staying protected. At night, in winter, they become a needle through which the wind stabs mercilessly. They are covered, of course. Heavy wooden shutters, built of oak or iron, are bolted tight. They were built to withstand arrows and storms alike, yet they rarely seal fully. You can hear a faint whistling, like a mournful flute. Each gust rattles the iron fittings, and every rattle makes you imagine lying awake, staring at the dark, waiting for a warmth that never comes. Did queens ever ask their attendants to stuff wool into the cracks? Scattered notes suggest this, though there is no certainty. It was a crude, temporary solution. Perhaps some rulers even ordered reeds or straw stuffed between stones in especially drafty chambers. Imagine the great king relying on bundles of straw jammed into his royal walls. Desperation, it seems, knows no rank. But the primary defense was not at the window. It was on the walls themselves. To counter these icy arrows of air, tapestries were hung, thick and heavy, across the stone. You picture them now, massive, woven scenes of hunts, saints, or mythical beasts. Their threads are vibrant in the torchlight, but their purpose tonight is purely practical. They are shields of wool and silk. They soften the echoes of the chamber, and they mute the drafts. In many castles, especially in France and England, these tapestries were the insulation. Accounts from the 15th century show monarchs spent enormous sums commissioning them, partly to impress visitors and partly to keep their teeth from chattering. And yet, a quirky detail remains. These tapestries were often not permanent. They were moved from castle to castle as the monarch traveled. They were rolled up like enormous rugs, then hung again in each new hall. Imagine the servants groaning under the weight of that task, their breath puffing in the icy corridors, all to provide a thin fabric barrier against the indifferent stone. You stand in the center of the room. The fire crackles far away, its heat a distant promise. The wind sighs at the shutters. The tapestries on the walls sway just slightly, moved by a breath of air that should not be here. The room is prepared, but the battle is not yet won. The true sanctuary, the final fortress, awaits. You turn your gaze toward the centerpiece of the chamber, the bed. It is not just a place to sleep. It is a statement of power. It towers above the cold floor like a monument, carved with thick posts that rise toward the ceiling. It is so massive, it resembles a stage. This is the royal four-poster bed, and it is almost a room within a room. Drapes hang from its canopy like velvet curtains at a theater, but they are meant not for show, but for survival. They are heavy, woven from wool, silk, or velvet, and dyed in colors reserved for the elite. You brush the fabric and you can feel its weight, heavy enough to silence whispers and shut out the light. Tonight they will be drawn tight, fastened with cords, to seal the royal body within a microclimate. This is the monarch's fortress within the fortress. Outside these drapes, the room will remain an icebox. Inside, if they are lucky, they will find a pocket of warmth. The mattress is stacked thick, stuffed with feathers, straw, and whatever padding could be found. You press your palm into it, and it feels oddly lumpy, uneven. Luxury in these days was relative. Compared to the peasants sleeping on straw pallets by the hearth, this was paradise. Yet paradise still froze. Edward III of England, who reigned in the 14th century, was documented to have grand beds layered with multiple quilts and fur throws. Even so, complaints about the cold are noted in his accounts. Wealth only softened the discomfort, it never erased it. And quirks abounded. One lesser-known tidbit reveals that some royals slept with dogs at their feet, not simply for companionship, but as living foot warmers. A noble lapdog or even a sturdy hunting hound could provide more comfort than any feather quilt. Picture that! The great ruler of realms who commands armies and kingdoms, relying on a panting dog to keep their toes from freezing? It is a scene both humbling and deeply human. And so, the monarch disrobes. Servants fuss with layers of linen and fur. The ceremony of bedtime wasn't just ritual, it was preparation for battle. They would curl into this bed, built like a fortress within a fortress, and an attendant would tie each curtain closed, trapping the body's heat inside. As you stand before it, you realize that this piece of furniture is the single most important tool for survival that the monarch possesses. You step closer to the great bed, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath your feet. The sheer scale of it is intimidating. Mainstream accounts tell us that medieval kings and queens often slept in beds so grand that servants needed steps to climb onto them. You picture this now, a mattress piled thick with layers, high enough that a child could vanish into its folds. The climb itself was part of the ritual. Let's look more closely at that mattress. It is not uniform like your modern one. It is a deep, lumpy stack of layers. Some are filled with feathers, some with wool, others layered with straw beneath the softer stuffing. Wealth meant that instead of one thin layer, the monarch stacked many, turning the bed into a padded fortress. Yet comfort was subjective. Some kings reportedly preferred firmer, straw-filled bases. Others demanded feather beds imported at absurd cost. Historians still argue whether personal taste or medical advice dictated these choices. After all, medieval doctors often claimed that certain materials helped to balance the body's humors. Now look at the frame itself. The posts are thick, carved with lions, religious motifs, or family crests. These carvings were not mere decoration. They signaled piety, lineage, and legitimacy. To lie in such a bed was not just to rest, but to embody authority. This was where treaties were sometimes whispered, where heirs were conceived, and where monarchs often died. These towering frames carried more history than most thrones. A quirky detail emerges here. In some castles, the beds were so valuable they actually traveled with the monarch. Imagine the absurdity. An entourage carrying not just trunks of clothing, but dismantled bed frames across muddy roads. The royal bed was portable power, reassembled in every new residence as a symbol of continuity. But even here, in this masterpiece of carpentry and symbolism, inconvenience lingered. The mattress had no springs. It was supported by a lattice of ropes stretched tight across the frame. Over time, these ropes would sag. Servants had to tighten them by pulling them taut beneath the mattress, using a special wrench-like tool. This grunting, physical work gave us the modern comfort phrase, "sleep tight." You smile at that, a phrase of reassurance, rooted in the hard labor of servants trying to keep their monarch's spine straight through the night. It must have felt surreal. A monarch who commands armies, lying down like a child, dependent on attendants to fluff pillows, arrange furs, and tighten the very ropes that held them aloft, all in the simple quest for a few hours of warmth. The bed is prepared, the stage is set, but the armor against the cold is not yet complete. We must now look at the layers that will cover the royal body, a mountain of bedding, as much about survival as it is about status. You lower yourself onto the bed now, and it almost swallows you whole. What strikes you first is not softness, but weight. The bedding presses down like layers of history themselves. One quilt, then another, then furs stacked so high you wonder if you might suffocate before you ever feel warm. The sensation is comforting and oppressive all at once. It is a heavy embrace, meant to pin you against the cold, to hold you in place. The monarch lying here would sink under the burden, but perhaps that was the point. Immobility meant warmth. A straightforward fact comes to mind. Inventories from castles, such as Hampton Court, list as many as 7 or 8 distinct coverings on a single royal bed in winter. This wasn't just a blanket, it was a system. It included feather mattresses, woolen blankets, fur throws, and sometimes even silken quilts imported at great cost from Italy. The abundance was a symbol of wealth, of course, but it was also a practical shield against the frost. Now, let's explore those furs. This is where luxury and survival truly met. You might imagine heavy bear or wolf pelts, and those were used, but the most prized furs were often the softest. And here, a quirky detail. Have you heard of squirrel fur? It was called vair. It was a luxury material, meticulously sewn into patchwork linings for cloaks and bedding. Each tiny piece came from the animal's belly, a pale blue-gray stitched into a shimmering mosaic. You might picture Cinderella's glass slipper, but in the original, older versions of the tale, her slipper was not made of verre, the French word for glass. It was made of vair, a fur so precious, so prized, that it glittered in the candlelight like glass. Imagine that! Kings and queens lying beneath layers of squirrel bellies just to keep their toes from freezing. It is not quite the fairy tale, is it? You reach down and feel how uneven the bedding becomes. The wool blankets scratch your skin, while the silken covers slide away with the slightest movement. The furs smell faintly of musk. The odor of the animals lingers, no matter how carefully they are treated. You wrinkle your nose, realizing that medieval luxury was rarely clean. Historians still debate whether this bedding was washed often or only replaced. The risk of soaking wool and fur in water might ruin it completely. It's more likely that perfume sachets and dried herbs were tucked between the layers, serving more to mask the odor than to freshen the cloth. Servants would spend long moments preparing these layers. They fluffed the feather beds, they shook out the quilts, they smoothed the linens, and they laid each fur precisely so the seams did not overlap. The bed became less an object of rest than a stage, set carefully for the nightly drama of sleep. Now you tuck yourself under the covers. The first blanket is scratchy. The next is heavy. The third is softer but slippery. The fourth is almost suffocating. By the time the furs are pulled up on top, you are trapped in a sandwich of cloth and pelt. Slowly, your body heat begins to build a fragile bubble. The cold fades, just enough for drowsiness to creep in. You think about the peasants huddling on straw by smoky hearths, and suddenly this mountain of blankets feels almost divine. Yet still, the cold seeps through. A draft brushes your cheek. It is a reminder that no number of blankets can ever erase the stone's persistent chill. You lie there, bundled beneath these mountains of bedding, when you notice another detail of the royal night. What is the monarch wearing to bed? Forget your idea of thin cotton pajamas or a simple t-shirt. A king or queen of the Middle Ages stepped into bed clad like someone preparing for a drafty vigil. First, a long linen shirt. You run your fingers over the imagined fabric. It is coarse against the skin, the weave loose but sturdy. The warmth it offers is uneven, but it is better than nothing. In the 15th century, nobles wore nightshirts made from linen, or even silk if wealth allowed. These were not simple garments. Some were embroidered, some edged with lace. Because even in the privacy of the chamber, appearances mattered. The queen's attendants would see her disrobe, and even in her sleep, she was meant to embody dignity. But this was not enough. Over the shirt, they wore heavy nightgowns, and on their feet, wool socks. Perhaps even leather slippers. Yes, shoes in bed. Not the soft slippers you might imagine, but house shoes to keep feet warm on the icy rush mats when rising briefly in the night. It sounds absurd until you recall the stone floors, which bite hard enough to make you yelp at a single bare footstep. Now for something more curious. Fur-lined nightcaps. These odd little hats, sometimes ridiculed in later centuries, were essential in drafty castles. Heat escapes from the head, and so monarchs pulled on caps with flaps covering their ears, like medieval winter helmets for slumber. Imagine Henry VIII, a man famous for his swagger, settling into bed with a snug little cap pulled down tight. It is an image both comic and human. This layering was more than comfort. It was believed to protect health. Medical theory of the time warned against cold air entering the body through the pores while one slept. To be uncovered was considered dangerous. Here comes a fringe tidbit. Some monarchs, especially in northern courts, supposedly had special fur mittens for sleep. It's difficult to know how widespread this was, but a few scattered references mention it. Picture the royal hands, usually raised in benediction or signing decrees, now tucked in fuzzy gloves, as though preparing for a snowball fight in their dreams. You realize now that royalty did not sleep like the portraits suggest, at ease in soft beds. They slept armored against the cold. Draped in furs, heads capped, feet wrapped, bodies stiff in their heavy linens. Their crowns may have rested on tables, but the weight of winter remained upon them all night long. The monarch is now in bed, dressed in their armor of cloth. The mountain of bedding is piled high, but the most important step is yet to come. The sealing of the sanctuary. An attendant steps forward. You watch as they reach for the edge of the first heavy drape. You hear it now, a low, heavy swish as the fabric glides on its rings, sealing one corner of the world away. The attendant moves to the next, and the next, and the last. The heavy curtains fall into place, and suddenly the cavernous, echoing chamber feels like a small tent pitched inside a cathedral. You are surrounded, not just by fabric, but by strategy. Every detail of this enclosure has a purpose: to trap warmth, to soften sound, and to shield the monarch from the biting cold that creeps relentlessly through the castle's walls. When you run your hand along the inner lining, you notice how thick it is. This is not a single sheet of cloth. It is velvet layered over wool, sometimes even quilted with additional padding for good measure. Descriptions from the 15th and 16th centuries make it clear, not ornamental. In fact, accounts from the court of Burgundy describe whole sets of curtains that cost more than the very furniture they enclosed. They were drawn tightly at night, fastened with cords or secured with weighted hems, so that not even the strongest gust of wind could stir them. Within this space, the monarch slept inside what was, effectively, a microclimate. Experts today still disagree on how effective these curtains truly were. Some believe the thick, overlapping folds could raise the temperature inside by several degrees, turning an unlivable stone vault into a tolerable cocoon. Others argue that they merely prevented the direct drafts, but left the air inside stuffy, heavy with smoke, sweat, and the moisture of human breath. You can almost test it yourself. Breathe deeply within this enclosed space. The air is warmer, yes, but it clings to your throat. And here, one peculiar detail comes to light. Some sets of hangings were decorated with intricate scenes of gardens or summer hunts. Imagine lying inside, shivering beneath your furs, yet surrounded visually by woven flowers, leaping deer, and golden sunlight. It was a psychological trick as much as it was decoration, a reminder of warmth in the dead of winter. The imagery may have offered comfort, or perhaps a deep irony, depending on your mood at 3 in the morning. But for now, the chamber beyond has vanished. The drafty windows, the cold stone floor, the echo of the guards' boots, all disappear. You are in your own world, a fragile sanctuary stitched together with thread. As you lie in this enclosed cocoon, you notice the air is not just warm and thick. It has a distinct smell. It smells faintly of its materials, of dye, of beeswax from polishing, and of the many winters it has endured. The fabric absorbed everything. It absorbed moisture from the breath of sleepers, from spilled wine, and from the very frost that condensed on its outer layer. Over time, these hangings grew musty and heavy. And so, an unusual practice was born. Perfumed sachets were tucked into the folds. Small bags of lavender, rose petals, or other dried herbs were hidden within the layers, mingling with the heavy smell of wool and velvet. The result was a strange cocktail of aromas, half apothecary, half barnyard, half chapel. You might wrinkle your nose at the thought, but to a medieval sleeper, this was reassurance. Fragrance carried both spiritual and medical significance. It was believed to ward off disease carried on the night air, the malaria. These curtains were so valuable that they were not fixtures of the castle. They were fixtures of the monarch. There are records of monarchs passing down their bed curtains as valuable heirlooms. The thought may amuse you. Crowns of gold are one thing, but a set of old, musty curtains as a royal treasure? Yet that was the reality of wealth in a world where warmth equaled survival. Contemporary inventory suggests that multiple sets of hangings traveled with the royal household. They were rolled carefully into trunks. One winter might call for the thick velvet set, a milder season for the lighter silk embroidered with hunting scenes. It was, in effect, a wardrobe for the bed itself. This mobility reminds you how central the bed was. Wherever the monarch went, the curtains followed, ready to transform any cold stone room into a recognizable, familiar nest. You may pause now and imagine yourself pulling those curtains shut. You settle back, the layers pressing against your chest, the cap snug on your head. The wind hammers against the shutters outside, but within this fabric cave, you feel almost safe. Almost. Because no matter how rich the curtains, no matter how thick the furs, the cold remains. It is a constant presence, pressing at the edges, reminding you that winter always finds a way in. The sanctuary is sealed, but it is not by itself warm. It only traps the heat that is brought into it. And for that, the monarch required active measures of fire. The glow of fire catches your eye, visible through a gap in the curtains. Across the chamber, a great hearth smolders with stubborn determination. Its flames lick upward before collapsing into embers. You imagine stepping out of the bed, the wooden boards cold beneath your feet, and walking toward it. But the warmth seems shy. It is hesitant to leave its small circle. By the time you've crossed half the room, the chill reclaims you. Fireplaces in medieval castles were enormous, grand affairs. Their hoods were carved from stone, their mantles heavy with ornament. Yet, their heat rarely matched their appearance. They roared brightly when first stoked, then sulked, leaving the vast halls as cold as caves. The paradox is clear. The high vaulted ceilings that made the room so majestic also made it impossible to heat. Most of the warmth escaped, rising far overhead, leaving the sleepers below in the coldest part of the room. And the cost of this meager heat was staggering. From household accounts, we know that servants fed these fires constantly in winter. They dragged logs as thick as a man's arm through endless corridors. Records from Scottish castles mention entire forests being stripped for firewood during particularly harsh winters. A king could command armies, but he could never command a fire to heat stone evenly. One overlooked detail reveals itself in the smell. The fuel was not always pleasant. Fires fueled by peat or wood that was still damp gave off an acrid smoke. It clung to the curtains, the tapestries, and the clothes, perfuming the royal garments not with roses, but with smoldering fuel. Some monarchs preferred fragrant woods, like cedar or juniper, imported at great cost. This was partly for the scent, but mostly for the prestige. To burn cedar in your hearth was to announce to the world that you were wealthy enough to perfume the very air with every flicker. Since the great hearth was too distant and inefficient, a more direct solution was needed. A curious custom emerges here, the brazier. These were portable metal bowls filled with glowing hot coals and placed near the bed. Sometimes they were even placed just inside the curtains. These iron containers radiated warmth like miniature suns. You can almost see them now, glowing orange, with lazy curls of smoke wafting upward into the canopy. But imagine sleeping next to one. This was comfort and danger balanced on a knife's edge. Sparks might spit. The air inside the sealed curtains would thicken with ash and fumes. And should a coal fall or the brazier be tipped by a stray foot, the fire could consume the heavy hangings and blankets before anyone even woke. Researchers remain divided on how effective this truly was, but it was a risk many were willing to take. There was a third, safer method. An eccentric note: attendants sometimes placed heated stones or bricks wrapped tightly in cloth beneath the bedding before the monarch retired. You picture the attendants hustling with tongs, slipping these warm bundles under the sheets like hidden coals. The comfort lasted only briefly, fading as the night deepened. But that first contact with warmth in a bed that was otherwise icy must have felt like heaven. Now, picture yourself lying back in the bed. You hear the servants enter softly to feed the fire at intervals throughout the night. The scrape of iron tools against logs, the hush of footsteps, the muffled thud of fresh wood. Even sleep was never private. Warmth demanded company. The monarch dozed while others labored, a constant reminder that survival in winter was a communal act, even for royalty. The fire provides heat, but its light is dim and distant. The brazier glows, but it does not illuminate. For light, you must turn to the other source of fire in the room. The candle. Candles stand in clusters on iron stands, their flames trembling whenever the wind sneaks through a crack. They give just enough light to read a prayer book or to glimpse the embroidered canopy overhead, but never enough to chase the shadows from the corners. And then you notice the smell. It is thick, waxy, almost greasy. It clings to your nose and throat. This is the smell of tallow. Contemporary descriptions remind us that while clean-burning beeswax candles existed, they were costly luxuries. They were reserved for grand feasts or for the altar in a church service. In the private bedchamber, monarchs often relied on the cheaper tallow candles made from rendered animal fat. Even in palaces, economy crept into the night. Imagine a queen drifting off to sleep, her last vision not one of golden brilliance, but the stubby glow of smoky, greasy tapers. One odd practice reveals itself in the flicker. The wicks of tallow candles did not burn away cleanly. They had to be trimmed constantly. Attendants used special scissor-like tools called snuffers to clip the wicks. You picture a servant leaning over the king's bed at midnight, delicately clipping a wick while trying not to wake the sleeping monarch. The room would briefly darken, then brighten again with a steadier flame. It was a small choreography, repeated endlessly. Even sleep demanded maintenance. Specialists still disagree about how much light a monarch truly wanted while sleeping. Some argue they preferred near total darkness, for any excess flame consumed precious oxygen inside the enclosed curtains. Others suggest that a faint candlelight was always left burning, for reassurance. It kept away the fears of thieves, of spirits, or of sudden illness in the dark. The light itself changed the psychology of the night. The candles burned low, their flames sinking as the hours passed, marking time in a way that clocks could not. The slow guttering of the wax was like a heartbeat for the room. And of course, the danger was constant. Candles placed too near the curtains posed a constant risk. Many fires in castles began this way, from a careless flame brushing against dry, heavy fabric. Servants had to be vigilant, extinguishing wicks before sleep deepened. The very tapestries, furs, and bedding that kept them warm were tinder, just waiting for a spark. You realize that light in the medieval night was never casual. It was fragile, costly, and dangerous. A luxury balanced on a wick. The fires are stoked. The candles are lit. The air is thick with smoke and tallow. But the bed itself remains an icy shock, until the final ritual of the evening. The chamber is quiet now, save for the rustle of footsteps you almost didn't hear. A servant approaches the royal bed with practiced care, carrying a long-handled pan, its metal gleaming in the candlelight. Inside it, a bed of glowing embers. This, you realize, is not for cooking. It is for comfort. This is the warming pan, an invention both ingenious and deeply risky. From surviving household accounts, we know that warming pans and heated bricks were common in noble households by the late Middle Ages. Servants filled them with hot coals, then hurried to the bed before the embers lost their precious heat. The goal was simple: to banish the shock of icy sheets. You watch as the servant lifts the heavy mountain of bedding. The pan's lid rattles softly as it is slipped between the layers, moved back and forth to spread the warmth. A faint smell of scorched linen drifts up where a careless touch came too close. Imagine the relief of sliding beneath covers that have been pre-warmed by glowing metal. For a king or queen, that brief moment of luxury must have felt priceless. Yet, one eccentric twist surfaces. Warming pans occasionally left singeing marks or even started small fires. There are reports of scorched bedding, of smoke filling the curtains, of attendants punished severely for their clumsiness. You picture the panic of a servant, realizing they had nearly set the royal bed alight. Comfort and catastrophe, separated by only a thin sheet of linen. Scholarly opinion is divided on how widespread such devices truly were. Some believe every winter night in a palace saw a parade of warming pans. Others think they were reserved for only the harshest weather, too laborious to prepare daily. But there was another method, a more intimate and perhaps stranger solution. Servants themselves became living bed warmers. Attendants, often of lower rank, would sometimes climb into the royal bed moments before the monarch, using their own body heat to soften the sting of the frozen linens. The practice might seem humiliating to us now, but in the context of survival, it was practical. A living furnace dismissed just before the ruler settled in. One peculiar anecdote even suggests that certain monarchs had favorite servants, prized not for loyalty or wit, but for their skill with glowing coals, or perhaps for their own body heat. Imagine your entire career depending on whether the king's feet felt pleasantly toasty. It is both absurd and strangely human. Wealth did not eliminate the chill. It only bought these brief, fragile reprieves. You shift under the weight of the quilts, feeling the last vestiges of warmth from the pan, and you hear faint movement nearby. The bed is not a solitary refuge. For us, the idea of privacy and sleep feels natural, almost sacred. But in the Middle Ages, the royal bed was a place of politics as much as it was a place of rest. Monarchs often shared their bed, not just with their spouses, but with nobles, attendants, or even foreign guests. Heat was one obvious reason. More bodies meant more warmth. But the practice spoke to status and trust. To be invited beneath the royal canopy was to be marked as intimate, favored, and indispensable. Evidence from chronicles tells us that important visitors sometimes slept in the same chamber, even in the same bed as their host monarch. This was not considered scandalous. Rather, it was a ritual of bonding. Sharing blankets forged alliances as effectively as signed treaties. Imagine two kings lying side by side in the dark, speaking softly as the embers glow. their words weaving agreements more binding than parchment. The intimacy of the bedchamber became a political theater. Edward II of England, for instance, slept with his favorites, not in secrecy, but openly, under the gaze of his court. Oddly enough, even queens sometimes slept with their ladies-in-waiting, pressed close, both to share heat and to preserve a sense of security in the vast, echoing chambers. But there was a third, and perhaps most critical reason for this communal sleep, a reason less about comfort and more about fear. One lesser-known detail hints that bed sharing also guarded against assassination. In the turbulent, shifting loyalties of a medieval court, monarchs surrounded themselves with loyal companions at night. The logic was simple. No attacker could reach the king without stepping over or stumbling upon several witnesses. Warmth, politics, and security. 3 reasons, all stitched into the same quilt. The royal bed, then, was more than furniture. It was a stage for alliances, a fortress against the cold, and a nest of both trust and suspicion. You lie there now, listening to the breathing of others, feeling the imagined weight of bodies close on either side. It is not private. It is not entirely comfortable. But in a medieval castle, during the longest winters, this closeness was survival itself. The bed is full. The curtains are drawn. But the castle is far from quiet. The night is just beginning, and with it comes the peculiar orchestra of the medieval dark. You lie back, and at first you think it will be silent, but the chamber quickly proves you wrong. Every sound seems magnified in the stillness. First, you hear the wind. It is the loudest voice in the castle. It doesn't just whistle. It wails through the cracks, groans along the battlements, and rattles the wooden shutters in their iron frames. You imagine lying in the dark, listening to the gusts rise and fall, like a living thing circling the walls. Some likened it to spirits, or the voices of saints whispering warnings. And then, beneath the wind, come the footsteps. Guards patrol the corridors and battlements through the night. You hear the muffled clank of mail and the thud of boots striking stone in a steady, relentless cadence. The echoes start faint, grow closer, then fade again into the distance. For a monarch, that rhythm could be reassurance, or it could be a reminder. Reassurance that watchmen guarded their life. A reminder that danger always lurked, requiring this vigilance. One eccentric note survives in reports of night watch songs. Certain guards were required to call out the hour and chant brief prayers as they patrolled. Imagine that strange mix. Deep voices breaking the silence, crying, "Midnight and all is well," or verses of psalms drifting through the cold stone corridors and into the royal bedchamber. Comforting perhaps, or perhaps just an irritation in a night already filled with noise. Closer still, the castle's own creatures add their part. Dogs, whether at the foot of the bed or in the hall, growl softly or shift, their claws clicking against the wood. Owls screech from the rafters. And in some records, even rats are mentioned, scurrying across the rush-covered floors, audible in the hush of the small hours. You pull the covers tighter at the thought, realizing that royal blood did not exempt anyone from sharing their space with pests. Debate continues among researchers about whether such a cacophony hindered or aided sleep. Some suggest medieval people were simply accustomed to it. Others argue that insomnia was common, worsened by every draft and disturbance. It is not silence. It is a collage of noises. The hiss of wind, the creak of timber, the crack of cooling stone, the distant shout of a guard. The castle itself whispers and groans, as if it too were alive and dreaming in the cold. You curl deeper beneath the quilts, but your mind drifts toward another, less romantic discomfort: cleanliness, or the lack of it. The royal bedchamber might look splendid with its gilded hangings and carved posts, but when it came to hygiene, even kings and queens could not escape the realities of medieval life. The linen sheets, yes, they were used, but they were washed far less often than you might hope. In winter, laundering was a monumental task. It meant hauling water, breaking ice, and trying to dry heavy, sodden cloth by smoky fires. Household accounts tell us that sheets were sometimes changed weekly in the wealthiest courts, but the frequency surely dropped when the snow piled high. And the furs, the heavy quilts, these rarely, if ever, saw soap and water. Washing would ruin their texture. Instead, as we know, perfumes and herbs were used to mask the growing staleness. A peculiar practice surfaces here. Sprigs of rosemary or lavender were often tucked into the bedding itself, not just for the scent, but to discourage lice and fleas. You imagine lying down, brushing against brittle herbs crackling beneath the sheets. The purpose was practical. Insects thrived in the warmth of the layered bedding, and keeping them at bay was an endless and often losing struggle. The royal body, for all its authority, was just as appetizing to pests as any peasant's. Imagine the ruler of half of Europe scratching at flea bites in the dark, muttering curses as the wind howled outside. And then there was the matter of the chamber pot. It was stored discreetly, perhaps behind a screen, or even within a special cabinet near the bed. It brought relief without forcing the monarch to leave the warm cocoon of the curtains. Yet the odor lingered. It mingled with the tallow smoke, the musty wool, and the damp. Servants emptied them each morning, but through the night the smell hovered like an unwelcome guest. To our modern sensibilities, the thought is unpleasant, but in a world without plumbing, it was simple, unavoidable necessity. You lie there now, imagining the scratch of linen not freshly laundered, the weight of furs with their musky animal scent, the faint crackle of rosemary under your hand. Cleanliness was relative. Comfort was never absolute. The heaviness of the bed, the smell of smoke and herbs, all of it begins to blur as your thoughts wander toward the evening meal that preceded this uneasy sleep. For royals, bedtime did not come on an empty stomach. Winter nights often followed grand feasts held in the drafty great halls below, where torches flickered and minstrels played, and platters groaned under the weight of roasted meats. Imagine trudging up the cold stone stairs afterward, your belly full of venison, boar, or swine, washed down with heavy spiced wine. You lie back in bed now, and you feel that fullness pressing against your ribs. Sleep, under such conditions, was not always restful. Medieval kings and queens dined heavily on roasted fowl, bread thick with butter, and stews swimming in exotic spices imported at enormous cost. Even in winter, their tables dazzled with preserved fruits and wine, mulled with cinnamon or cloves. A curious detail surfaces. Physicians of the time frequently advised against overeating at night, warning that it produced nightmares or disturbed the body's humors. Yet monarchs, ever human, often ignored such counsel. After hours of feasting, they carried that indulgence with them into bed. Some chroniclers even hint that certain kings complained of indigestion and night sweats, ailments made worse by the heavy bedding piled upon them. The drink, too, played its part. Spiced wine or strong ale was thought to warm the body against the winter chill. You can almost feel it now, a false heat spreading through your chest, only to fade as the cold presses back in. For a brief while, alcohol dulled the discomfort, but it also blurred the edge between waking and sleeping, and took on vivid, sometimes bizarre colors. One eccentric practice at certain courts was the consumption of a posset just before bed. This was a mixture of hot milk, ale, and spices, thick, cloying, and warm. It was intended as a soporific. Imagine sipping such a potion in a frigid room, then sinking under the quilts, drowsy but unsettled. You picture it now, the king adjusting his fur cap, the queen sinking into her pillows, both heavy with food and wine. Their bodies are not light. Beneath the curtains, sleep comes slowly, thick as syrup. The banquet may have been splendid, but the price was often paid in restless slumber. The body is heavy, the air is cold, the room is filled with sounds and smells. But the preparations are not just physical. The mind, too, must be armored for the night. A monarch did not simply tumble into bed. The act of retiring was layered with ceremony, shaped by faith, fear, and formality. You hear it now, the soft murmur of attendants reciting prayers as they help the king or queen out of heavy robes and into their linen nightshirt. The flicker of candles grows gentler. Perhaps incense curls into the air, and the chamber shifts from a public space to a sacred one. Royal chaplains often played a role at bedtime. Records describe priests or confessors present in the chamber, offering blessings before the monarch closed their eyes. The words were not elaborate, but they were weighty. Pleas for protection against the dangers of the night. For in medieval thought, darkness was not just an absence of light. It was a realm of demons, of wandering spirits, and of sudden, unexplained illness. To lie down to sleep meant surrendering your conscious guard to forces beyond control. A whispered paternoster or an Ave Maria was armor, just as vital as the blankets and curtains. One detail, found in household ordinances, is the requirement for candles to burn before icons or crucifixes while the monarch slept. Imagine that faint golden glow falling across the painted faces of saints, their eyes watching through the night. Comforting to some, perhaps unsettling to others. An intriguing habit appears in some chronicles. Monarchs might trace the sign of the cross on their pillows before resting their heads. Others sprinkled holy water on the bed curtains, consecrating their small fabric fortress. These gestures may sound quaint, but in their minds, they offered genuine protection against sudden death, nightmares, or evil spirits. Scholars remain uncertain whether these rituals were universal or more personal quirks of piety. But the pattern is clear. Religion seeped into the very fabric of sleep. There were practical elements too. Prayers often included requests for health and for fertility. A queen, anxious to bear an heir, might fall asleep repeating invocations to saints associated with childbirth. A king, facing war, might dream of victory after murmuring a psalm. The night was not just rest. It was preparation for the burdens of the day to come. And so the monarch lies back. A servant kneels at the foot of the bed, reciting a final blessing. The curtains sway as someone closes them tight, sealing in both warmth and whispered prayers. And yet, the night remains restless. Superstition clung to every breath of night air. A queen might tuck a saint's medal under her pillow. A king might sleep with a holy relic at his bedside. These were not trinkets, they were shields. And the dreams, the dreams, the heavy feasts, the spiced wine, and the smoky air combined to produce visions that were vivid and strange. A nightmare was never just a nightmare. It could be a prophecy or a warning from God. You picture the monarch waking suddenly, heart racing, convinced that some ghastly image held meaning. But perhaps the strangest part of the medieval night was its very structure. You wake in the dark, not from a nightmare, but simply because it is time. In the Middle Ages, sleep was rarely continuous. Evidence from medical treatises, diaries, and literature shows that segmented sleep was the norm. People spoke of a first sleep and a second sleep. You sit up now, the curtains heavy around you, and feel the strange stillness of that midnight gap. In these icy chambers, the first portion of slumber lasted a few hours, broken when the fire sank low and the cold pressed back in. What did one do in this waking interval? Monarchs might rise, sip warm mulled wine left by an attendant, or simply sit in thought. A 15th century French physician described this interval as an ideal time for reflection or for intimacy. For monarchs, it was often used for strategy. Imagine a king, half drowsy, cloak pulled around his shoulders, murmuring plans to his closest advisors, who stood waiting in the shadows. The bedchamber thus became both bedroom and council chamber in those liminal hours. Curiously, some writers praise this rhythm as healthier than our unbroken sleep, claiming it aligned with the body's natural humors. Others condemned it, warning that too much wakefulness at night invited melancholy. During this wakeful pause, monarchs might also read or have scriptures read aloud to them. You can almost hear the quiet murmur of psalms drifting through the curtains, the flicker of a candle flame catching the gold leaf of a manuscript page. After this interlude, perhaps an hour or two, they returned to bed for the second sleep, which would last until dawn. You lie back into that rhythm now, understanding that rest in a medieval castle was not a single, unbroken line. It was a cycle. The stillness of this midnight pause leads your thoughts upward, beyond the curtains and the stone, to the sky itself. For medieval monarchs, sleep was not only shaped by warmth and ritual, but also by the stars. Astrology threaded through their decisions, and the hours of rest were no exception. Court astrologers advised on when to sleep, when to wake, and even which direction the bed should face. You smile at the thought. Rulers who commanded armies still deferred to the alignment of planets before shutting their eyes. Accounts from royal courts in England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire mention astrologers preparing charts and recommending auspicious hours of repose. It sounds extravagant, yet it reflected a deep belief that celestial bodies influenced health, mood, and dreams. A king might delay retiring if the stars were inauspicious. An unusual anecdote survives about Catherine de' Medici, who reportedly kept astrologers close and consulted them about her daily rhythms, including her rest. Did she truly believe her dreams were shaped by Jupiter's position? Or was it a psychological balm, reassuring her in turbulent times? One eccentric detail lies in the placement of the bed itself. Some medical astrological texts advised orienting the head toward the east to align with the rising sun and renewal. Others suggested south for warmth. Imagine attendants grunting in the cold, dragging the heavy royal bed across the rush-covered floor just to match an astrologer's chart. The debate about dreams also entered this realm. Astrologers claimed to interpret royal visions, tying them to planetary movements. A nightmare after feasting might be blamed not on indigestion, but on Saturn's dark influence. You can picture the queen shifting uncomfortably, no matter what the stars advised, tugging her furs closer because the draft through the shutter had no regard for constellations. Still, the belief brought a kind of comfort. To think one's night was written in the heavens was to impose order upon the chaos of cold and dark. The stars may watch, but the cold continues its slow, relentless siege. You stir from your second sleep, and for a moment it feels as if the cold itself has crept beneath the curtains. Then you realize it is not imagination. You shift beneath the covers, and you notice it, the sight of your own breath rising in a pale mist. Imagine being a monarch, encased in velvet and fur, yet waking to see a puff of vapor drift before your face like smoke. Cold has breached the fortress of curtains. Contemporary accounts describe frost forming inside royal chambers during severe winters. Servants recorded mornings when water in basins was frozen solid, or when the bed curtains themselves stiffened with rime. In 1407, a chronicler of the French court noted with astonishment that ice formed on a king's coverlet while he slept. Such details remind us that the struggle was not metaphorical. It was physical. One odd little note emerges in letters. Courtiers sometimes joked about writing their names in the frost on the inside of the glass, or even on the bedposts. Picture a half-frozen noble tracing idle patterns at dawn while waiting for the fires to be stoked. But sometimes it was worse than frost. In the harshest winters, even castle walls could not fully hold back the weather. Servants recorded mornings when thin drifts of snow had collected on window ledges, or when flakes had blown through cracks in the shutters and arrow slits, dusting the floor with white. A courtier in Scotland once wrote of finding snow on the bed curtains themselves, shaken loose when the wind howled strongest. Imagine lying half asleep, only to feel a single cold flake land upon your cheek. The shock would steal your breath more sharply than any nightmare. Servants would scramble to sweep away the icy trespass before it melted into dampness. You pull the covers tighter, but the reminder is sharp. No curtain, no wall, no royal bed can keep winter fully at bay. The monarch endures, pulling furs closer, calling for more blankets, perhaps muttering a prayer for dawn. And in that moment, stripped of ceremony, they are as vulnerable as any peasant in a hut. The monarch is a prisoner of the cold, but they are also a prisoner of their station. They are never truly settled, for the entire court is in constant motion. The frost lingers in the air. But imagine now that the monarch is not in their usual chamber at all. Castles were not always permanent residences. Kings and queens traveled constantly, dragging their entire households across muddy roads and frozen fields. Their court was not a place, but a progress, and with them they brought one of the strangest and most vital luxuries of power, a traveling bed. Royal itineraries reveal that these beds were treated almost like thrones. They were symbols of authority as much as instruments of survival. When a ruler journeyed from one fortress to another, from a monastery to a manor house, an entire team of carpenters would dismantle the heavy bed frame. They packed its carved panels and thick posts and hauled it by cart. Imagine the absurdity of it. An entourage carrying not just trunks of clothing and coffers of gold, but the disassembled pieces of a bedroom across muddy roads. Meanwhile, the curtains, the quilts, and the pillows were bundled into their own trunks. This was a wardrobe for the bed itself, as changeable as a king's attire. Wherever the monarch stopped, servants would reassemble the bed as if erecting a portable palace. Imagine the relief. You step into a new, foreign, drafty hall, the stone unfamiliar and cold. But over in the corner, your servants have erected the same familiar canopy, the same wooden walls, the same scent, a single fragment of home transplanted onto foreign stone. One curious detail, preserved in household ordinances, describes this process in almost ceremonial language. The king's bed was to be erected first in any new residence. Before the kitchens were fully arranged, before the councils were convened, the bed had to be ready. Comfort, or at least the semblance of continuity, mattered as much as governance. Researchers continue to discuss whether these traveling beds were truly practical for warmth or if they were largely symbolic. Some argue that familiarity itself was a comfort, that sleeping within the same structure reduced the anxiety of endless weary journeys. Others suggest the true benefit lay in ensuring privacy, since the bed's thick curtains provided a known, trusted cocoon, even in a hall full of strangers. Whatever the case, the spectacle highlights the strange mixture of fragility and grandeur at the heart of kingship. One eccentric story tells of Henry VIII. He apparently insisted that his portable bed accompany him even on hunting expeditions. Picture the absurdity of such excess. Muddy boots clattering on a rough wooden floor, barking hounds outside, and then, in the corner of a rustic lodge, stands a towering four-poster bed, glowing with crimson curtains. A monarch's sleep, no matter how impractical, could not be left to chance. And yet, the cold followed them everywhere. You picture yourself now, trudging along with this royal procession, watching servants unload timber and fabric, assembling the same heavy structure again and again. The task is exhausting, yet vital. The traveling bed becomes more than furniture. It is a moving fortress against the night, a symbol of identity dragged across kingdoms. Inside it, kings and queens curled up like anyone else, whispering prayers, tugging furs closer, and watching the frost form at the edges. Outside, the world changed with every mile. Inside, at least for a few hours, they could pretend they slept in permanence. The cold, it seems, is the great equalizer. It humbles kings and queens, forcing them into these elaborate, desperate rituals of survival. But this comparison brings us to a larger, more pointed question. For all their suffering, how did the monarch's night compare to the vast majority of their subjects, the peasants huddled outside the castle walls? The frost lingers in the air. But imagine now that the monarch is not in their usual chamber at all. Castles were not always permanent residences. Kings and queens traveled constantly, dragging their entire households across muddy roads and frozen fields. Their court was not a place, but a progress. And with them, they brought one of the strangest and most vital luxuries of power, a traveling bed. Royal itineraries reveal that these beds were treated almost like thrones. They were symbols of authority as much as instruments of survival. When a ruler journeyed from one fortress to another, from a monastery to a manor house, an entire team of carpenters would dismantle the heavy bed frame. They packed its carved panels and thick posts and hauled it by cart. Imagine the absurdity of it, an entourage carrying not just trunks of clothing and coffers of gold, but the disassembled pieces of a bedroom across muddy roads. Meanwhile, the curtains, the quilts, and the pillows were bundled into their own trunks. This was a wardrobe for the bed itself, as changeable as a king's attire. Wherever the monarch stopped, servants would reassemble the bed as if erecting a portable palace. Imagine the relief. You step into a new, foreign, drafty hall, the stone unfamiliar and cold. But over in the corner, your servants have erected the same familiar canopy, the same wooden walls, the same scent, a single fragment of home transplanted onto foreign stone. One curious detail, preserved in household ordinances, describes this process in almost ceremonial language. The king's bed was to be erected first in any new residence. Before the kitchens were fully arranged, before the councils were convened, the bed had to be ready. Comfort, or at least the semblance of continuity, mattered as much as governance. Researchers continue to discuss whether these traveling beds were truly practical for warmth, or if they were largely symbolic. Some argue that familiarity itself was a comfort, that sleeping within the same structure reduced the anxiety of endless, weary journeys. Others suggest the true benefit lay in ensuring privacy, since the bed's thick curtains provided a known, trusted cocoon, even in a hall full of strangers. Whatever the case, the spectacle highlights the strange mixture of fragility and grandeur at the heart of kingship. One eccentric story tells of Henry VIII. He apparently insisted that his portable bed accompany him even on hunting expeditions. Picture the absurdity of such excess. Muddy boots clattering on a rough wooden floor, barking hounds outside, and then in the corner of a rustic lodge stands a towering four-poster bed glowing with crimson curtains. A monarch's sleep, no matter how impractical, could not be left to chance. And yet, the cold followed them everywhere. You picture yourself now, trudging along with this royal procession, watching servants unload timber and fabric, assembling the same heavy structure again and again. The task is exhausting, yet vital. The traveling bed becomes more than furniture. It is a moving fortress against the night, a symbol of identity dragged across kingdoms. Inside it, kings and queens curled up like anyone else, whispering prayers, tugging furs closer, and watching the frost form at the edges. Outside, the world changed with every mile. Inside, at least for a few hours, they could pretend they slept in permanence. The cold, it seems, is the great equalizer. It humbles kings and queens, forcing them into these elaborate, desperate rituals of survival. But this comparison brings us to a larger, more pointed question. For all their suffering, how did the monarch's night compare to the vast majority of their subjects, the peasants, huddled outside the castle walls? Comparison sharpens perspective. While the monarch lay beneath mountains of squirrel fur and silken quilts, peasants often slept on simple straw pallets scattered near a hearth. Their blankets were coarse wool, if they had them at all. Their primary source of warmth was not layers, but closeness. Contemporary records and illustrations reveal that common folk huddled as families, their bodies packed together like firewood. And they often shared their small single-room huts with their livestock. A cow or a sheep brought inside for the night gave off more consistent, reliable heat than any distant, inefficient hearth. Meanwhile, in the castle, the ruler complained of drafts despite layers of velvet. The irony is sharp. This brings us to a paradox that researchers still debate. Was the monarch truly more comfortable than the peasant during the harshest winters? Yes, the monarch had layers of bedding and servants to tend fires, but the sheer volume of their chambers, the vast, echoing halls and high stone ceilings, made them fundamentally harder to heat than a small, low-roofed cottage. Some suggest that peasants, despite their poverty, were often warmer in their smoky, crowded huts than kings were in their drafty great halls. Comfort, it seems, was not guaranteed by gold. A curious anecdote arises from manorial roles. Some villagers reportedly rotated places by the fire through the night, taking turns lying closest to the embers. Imagine the quiet shuffle of bodies in the dark, the whispered negotiations of who deserved the warm spot. Contrast that with a monarch ringing a bell for a servant to bring more coals. Both were interrupted by the demands of survival, but one endured it with communal bonds, the other with hierarchy. The cold, impartial as ever, spared no one. It only disguised itself differently. Scratchy straw for the villager, musty silk for the monarch. In the end, winter turned every sleeper into the same creature, huddled, anxious, and waiting for a warmth that would not truly come until the sun finally rose. You return to your imagined bed within the castle. The contrast with the world outside only sharpens the realities within. The hush of the bedchamber hides another presence, the steady, rhythmic vigilance of the night guards. Even as kings and queens attempted to rest, men in armor patrolled the halls. You can almost hear it again, the clank of mail, the muffled thud of boots on stone, the low murmur exchanged between two watchmen as they crossed paths in the cold. Sleep in a medieval castle was never entirely private. It was framed by the sound of protection. Administrative records from English and Burgundian courts make it clear that guards were assigned in shifts through the night. Their duty was not only to keep assassins and thieves at bay. In winter, their duties expanded. They were required to tend the great fires in the halls, to check that shutters were secure against the storm, and to ensure no stray candle threatened the sovereign. Imagine the relief of a queen listening to those distant footsteps, knowing someone was circling the castle walls while she drowsed behind her curtains. Specialists continue to disagree about how close these guards came to the royal chamber itself. Some argue that watchmen stood just outside the door, spears in hand, a visible deterrent. Others maintain that guards kept their distance so as not to disturb the sanctity of the monarch's rest. The truth probably varied depending on the ruler's temperament. A paranoid king might demand men at his very bedside. Security, after all, was not foolproof. Tales exist of assassins scaling walls or conspirators sneaking into chambers despite the patrols. One French king famously ordered additional locks on his bed curtains, fastening cords across the velvet as if hiding from his own household. Fear, like the cold, slipped beneath every door. But the vigilance was not just external. The greatest battles were often fought within the mind. For medieval monarchs, dreams were not idle fantasies. They were messages, warnings, glimpses of destiny. You can imagine a king waking with a start, sweat dampening his fur-lined nightcap, convinced that the flickering images of his sleep held meaning for his entire realm. Accounts from chronicles and letters show how seriously rulers regarded their dreams. Some were recorded by scribes the very next morning, preserved in annals alongside battles and treaties. A dream could be interpreted as divine favor or as a sign of impending doom. One of the most curious records tells of Henry I of England. He reportedly dreamed of his ship sinking shortly before the infamous White Ship disaster, a tragedy that claimed the life of his only legitimate heir. Coincidence or prophecy? We cannot know. But to contemporaries, it seemed a dreadful confirmation that the night could whisper truths ignored in the daylight. The interpretation of these visions often fell to court astrologers or the king's personal confessor. They would pore over the symbols, linking a dream of wolves to a coming rebellion, or a vision of fields to fertility and peace. Even nightmares stirred intense scrutiny. Imagine a queen describing a shadowy figure in her sleep, only to be told it signaled betrayal within her household. Trust, already so fragile, could shatter from a single restless night. Researchers debate how much influence these dreams truly had on political decisions. Some suggest they were used as rhetorical tools, a ruler citing a vision to justify a choice they had already made. Others believe that, steeped in medieval piety, monarchs genuinely saw their dreams as divine guidance. Either way, the images of the night bled into the strategies of the day. You lie there, heavy bedding pressing on your chest, the faint glow of a candle revealing the curtain's edge. Your mind replays fragments of a dream, a ship on a stormy sea, a shadow at the door. Do they mean anything, or are they just the residue of wine and venison? In the medieval world, meaning was unavoidable. Every dream was a potential prophecy, and every night was another chance for destiny to murmur in your ear. The weight of dreams lingers, but the cold and the simple ache of a body lying too long on a lumpy mattress demands practical remedies. What happened when a monarch simply couldn't sleep? You imagine an attendant approaching, summoned by a small bell. They carry a small wooden tray, setting it discreetly on a table near the bed. On it rests a goblet of steaming liquid, an herbal draught prepared to soothe both body and mind. Monarchs did not rely only on layers of bedding. They often turned to potions and concoctions to coax sleep through the long winter nights. Records from apothecaries and royal household accounts mention honeyed drinks mixed with poppy seeds, chamomile, or valerian root. These herbs were believed to calm the nerves, ease digestion, and encourage a gentle drowsiness. You lift the cup in your imagination and sip. The liquid is warm, thick with honey, but faintly bitter with herbs. The sweetness lingers on your tongue, the bitterness in your throat. Sleep feels closer, if not entirely certain. One eccentric detail, some mixtures included saffron. Saffron was prized not only for its color and flavor, but for its supposed power to cheer the heart. Picture a monarch clutching a golden-hued potion, believing it would push away melancholy as well as the cold. It was medicine and luxury, all in a single cup. Specialists remain divided about the effectiveness of these remedies. Some argue that they truly contained mild sedative properties. Others suggest the power was more psychological than chemical. Either way, the ritual mattered. To drink a carefully prepared potion before bed was to feel attended, protected, and hopeful that sleep would arrive without a struggle. Not all remedies were so gentle. Physicians sometimes prescribed stronger solutions, wine fortified with opiates, or spiced concoctions laced with narcotics. Imagine the uneasy balance between relief and danger. The monarch slipping into a heavy, unnatural slumber, while attendants prayed it was restorative and not fatal. There were also remedies that were burned, not sipped. Certain herbs were tossed onto the hot coals of the brazier, so their smoke might purify the air. You catch the scent of sage or rosemary filling the curtains. The smoke curls into your nostrils until your eyes sting faintly. You place the empty goblet down and lie back, the warmth spreading through your chest. You sense the blend of faith, science, and hope that surrounded these nightly remedies. Nothing guaranteed sleep in a frozen castle, but each sip and each sniff of herbs was a promise that someone had tried. The snow has been swept away, the herbal draught has been drunk. And yet, you realize the bed is not only a place of sleep. You are not always alone. For monarchs, this was also a stage for intimacy, sometimes tender, sometimes deeply strategic. Beneath the canopy, heirs were conceived, alliances were sealed, affections were shared, and in the depths of winter, the warmth of another body was as powerful against the cold as any fur. Records from royal households reveal that kings and queens did not always sleep apart, as later centuries might suggest. In fact, their shared bed was often a visible sign of unity, both personal and political. When the queen joined the king under the quilts, the entire court understood its significance. Heirs might be in the making, or a reconciliation after a dispute might be underway. The act of sharing a bed was watched, whispered about, and recorded. One intriguing anecdote comes from the court of France, where observers noted which nights the royal couple retired together and which they did not. Such details were matters of state importance. The bed was both the cradle of a lineage and a ledger of royal duty. But intimacy was not always marital. Favorites, mistresses, or companions sometimes occupied the royal bed. Oddly enough, the practice could be more political than romantic. As we know, sharing warmth was a privilege, a signal of favor, and often a tool of influence. A noble who spent the night near the king might find themselves in a stronger political position come morning. Scholars continue to debate whether these arrangements were as frequent as chronicles suggest, or whether court gossip simply exaggerated them. But there are lighter, more human details too. Letters hint at monarchs grumbling about their partner's cold feet, or nudging closer, or greedily stealing the better share of the blankets. Imagine Henry VIII pulling the furs toward himself, or a queen laughing softly as she warmed her hands against her husband's side. For all their grandeur, in these moments they were simply people, craving warmth and closeness. One eccentric practice, recorded in Spain, involved couples drinking spiced wine together in bed, a ritual believed to kindle both warmth and fertility. You picture the goblets gleaming in the firelight before the curtains were drawn. But the bed was a stage for life's end as well as its beginning. The warmth of intimacy fades, and another reality of winter nights presses in: illness. For monarchs, the cold, damp chamber was not just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Imagine waking in the dark, your breath wheezing, your chest heavy, the chill clinging to your lungs. In an age without antibiotics, a simple winter cough could spiral into a fever, and that fever into tragedy. Household physicians often blamed bad airs or miasmas that seeped into the body during sleep. Their writings warn against drafts creeping through shutters or dampness settling in the bedding. Monarchs were advised to keep their heads covered at all times, to drink warming tonics, and to avoid sleeping too near the walls, which were heavy with frost. Yet, even with such care, records overflow with accounts of colds, chills, and winter fevers. Henry VIII was notorious for keeping his fire stoked impossibly high, paranoid about the ailments that cold might provoke. His court, like many, was plagued by outbreaks of influenza and pneumonia during the long winters. A monarch might rule armies, but he could not rule his own lungs. An eccentric detail emerges from medical accounts. Treatments were often administered right in the bed. Leeches or cupping glasses were sometimes used at night to draw out the bad humors. Imagine the discomfort, lying beneath heavy quilts, weak with fever, while attendants fussed with bloodletting bowls. You can almost hear the sounds of illness in the dark, a hacking cough echoing off the cold stone, the rustle of attendants fetching water, the sharp crack of fresh logs thrown hastily onto the fire. The royal body was fragile. Despite crowns and armies, winter pressed in mercilessly, breeding sickness that no wealth could fully ward off. When you think of royal sleep, do not picture serene faces and golden chambers. Picture rest interrupted by coughing, bedding damp with fever, and servants whispering prayers over a sovereign who looked, in that moment, no stronger than any peasant's child. The coughing quiets, but the cold continues its slow siege. You look around the chamber and notice again how the architecture itself strains to adapt. These walls were built for defense, not comfort, and every winter forced nobles to improvise. Tapestries were the most obvious answer, great swaths of wool and silk. In winter, the heaviest sets were brought out, woven thick to block drafts. They told stories, yes, but their real triumph was insulation. One unusual tactic was hanging tapestries not only on walls, but across doorways, turning corridors into muffled fabric tunnels. The effect was cozy, perhaps, but also claustrophobic, as if the castle itself had shrunk in response to winter's bite. Oddly enough, even the furniture became part of the battle. Chairs and benches were draped with heavy covers, and in some cases, special bed tents were erected inside the bedchamber. These were, essentially, fabric rooms within the stone room, a desperate, smaller fortress of cloth. There are even eccentric notes of windows being stuffed with wool or reeds, a crude insulation that left rooms dim but less drafty. Servants jammed material into every crack, then draped the shutters with animal skins. And the floor mattered too. Rushes were strewn thick across the stone to trap heat. But carpets, imported from the East, became prized possessions. Imagine stepping down from the bed in your thick socks onto a layer of woven wool instead of bare stone. It could mean the difference between a sharp gasp of cold and a tolerable start to the day. And the soundscape. The chamber is far from silent. You begin to notice the other sounds of the royal night. First, the animals. Dogs stir restlessly, their claws scraping on the stone. Cats pad silently, hunting the rats that feasted in the rushes. You hear the scuffle of paws in the dark, a hiss, the squeak of prey caught. Even royalty's dreams carried the soundtrack of the hunt. Then the servants. Not all retired. Some remained in adjoining rooms, ready to answer a call for fresh logs or a warm drink. Their whispers and soft footsteps leak through the curtains, constant reminders that the bedchamber was never truly private. And then the bells. Church bells rang out, marking the canonical hours. The faint toll drifted through the castle walls, solemn and regular. Monks rose for midnight prayers in nearby chapels, their low, resonant chants sometimes audible in the sleeping court, like the very heartbeat of the medieval night. Add to this the unpredictable noises of weather, shutters banging loose, rain hammering against the leaded glass, and, in a peculiar, almost comic note that appears in some letters, the croaking of frogs in the castle moat, their chorus audible even through the thick stone walls. You lie there, hearing it all. Dogs, servants, bells, wind, even frogs. You realize that true silence belonged to no one, not even kings and queens. The chamber hums with this chorus of noises. But sometimes the greatest disturbances came from within. Monarchs were as human as any villager, and many struggled with sleeplessness. Chroniclers recorded tales of rulers pacing their halls at night, haunted by thoughts or tormented by unrest. These legends wove themselves into memory, shaping the image of a king who could not find peace. One story tells of Charles VI of France, who suffered bouts of terrible insomnia during his troubled reign. He was said to wander through his palace at night, muttering to himself, his attendants trailing behind with candles. His sleeplessness was not just personal. It became political, feeding fears about the stability of the crown itself. Another curious tale emerges from England. Richard III, later vilified by Shakespeare, was rumored to sleep poorly, plagued by dreams of betrayal. Chronicles hint that his restlessness grew worse in winter when the cold pressed hardest. Was it guilt, paranoia, or merely the deep physical discomfort of an icy stone chamber? The lines between history and legend blur, but the image of a restless king tossing beneath embroidered curtains lingers strongly. Accounts also speak of queens troubled by sleepless nights. Catherine of Aragon, during her years of exile in chilly English manners, reportedly endured nights of prayer rather than slumber. Wrapped in coarse blankets instead of royal furs, she sought comfort not from warmth, but from whispered devotion. Researchers today continue to argue whether these reports reflect genuine insomnia or if they were simply propaganda. Tales of sleepless monarchs often symbolize a troubled reign. Restlessness becomes a metaphor for instability. But perhaps the accounts are literal. Perhaps the drafts, the noise, the illness, and the heavy meals all conspire to rob even the most powerful of sleep. Now, picture yourself lying awake with them, staring into the dark canopy, hearing the wind outside and the quiet snores of companions nearby. The mind, already burdened with the responsibility of a realm, spins faster in the still hours. Doubts grow louder, fears grow sharper. In those moments, the crown means nothing. You are simply another human struggling to quiet your thoughts long enough to drift away. At last, after the segmented sleep, the nightmares, the prayers, the coffin, and the cold, the long night yields. A faint, gray glow creeps through a crack in the heavy shutters. You feel it before you see it, a subtle change in the air, a softening of the absolute darkness. It is a promise. Morning has finally broken winter's grip. The monarch stirs beneath the quilts. Their joints are stiff. Their limbs are heavy. But they are grateful for the relief of light. No matter how restless the night, dawn always carried with it a sense of survival. The royal morning begins with ritual. Servants enter quietly, their breath fogging in the air. They carry warm water in metal basins. The splash echoes as it's poured, steam rising briefly before the air snatches it away. Imagine dipping your hands into that water. It is icy by our standards, but to someone who has slept in a freezing chamber, it is bliss. The sting awakens the blood in numb fingers. The careful process of dressing begins. This is not dressing so much as arming oneself against the day. Layers of linen, wool, and fur are donned with the assistance of attendants. A heavy cloak is thrown around the shoulders, while the monarch sits on the bed's edge, yawning, perhaps sneezing. One unusual custom, the offering of spiced wine or warm broth, immediately upon waking. It was thought to warm the stomach and prepare the body for the day's demands. Picture the monarch, sipping slowly, still half asleep, the taste of cinnamon replacing the bitterness of the night air. Attendants move to the bed, brushing frost off the curtains, shaking them like snowy cloaks. They wipe moisture from the window glass, while the monarch mutters about the hardships of kingship. And so, you have walked through the long winter night of kings and queens. You have shared their chambers of stone and frost, their heavy curtains and prodded beds. You have felt the sting of drafts, smelled the mingling of tallow and herbs, and heard the restless chorus of guards, dogs, and wind. You have seen how even a crown could not command warmth, how every comfort was improvised, fragile, and fleeting. Let your mind now drift more slowly. Imagine that bedchamber not as a place of discomfort, but as a quiet sanctuary. The fire is low but steady. Its glow is no longer harsh but soft, painting the stone walls with a gentle light. The curtains, once a shield, now sway like sails in a calm breeze. The sounds of the castle fade, muffled, until they resemble nothing more than the hush of distant waves. You picture the monarch, at last, sinking into genuine rest. Body heavy, mind quiet. The fears of spirits, the burden of politics, the discomfort of cold, these all dissolve in the calm, steady rhythm of breath. The bed, once a fortress against winter, becomes a cradle of stillness. You share that cradle now. Feel the weight of your own blankets, not as suffocation, but as comfort, grounding you, holding you close. Outside, the world is quiet, but you are safe. Dawn will return soon enough, bringing with it noise and duty. But for now, in this moment, there is only calm. The night stretches softly, endlessly, inviting you to let go. So close your eyes, release the chill of their world, and embrace the warmth of your own. Drift gently into sleep. Sweet dreams. until morning comes.